But the general point that I want to make then is that humanist morality is based on those shared human values which are an integral part of what it is to be human, and which occur in all of the great world belief systems and religions, even though they're confused with a lot of irrational moral thought as well. Finally, I want to turn to what I've put under the heading of humanist spirituality. And I hesitate there because I don't like the word, and I think I share that unease with a lot of humanists. But at the same time, you need to talk about something like that, again, to reject the kind of accusation that's often made against humanists, namely that if you're committed to science, if you're committed to a scientific understanding of what it is to be human, then that commits you to some kind of materialism, and that commits you to a view of human life and a good human life which leaves no room for any spiritual dimension. Now, just a quick word about that use of the notion of of materialism, because again, that's just a crass misunderstanding. It's a crass misunderstanding of a basic ambiguity in the term materialism. As a humanist, I'm a materialist in the philosophical sense, that I think that everything in the universe ultimately has a physical basis, including human beings, and that human beings couldn't exist, couldn't act morally, couldn't have values of any kind unless there were the physical preconditions for it in the form of our physical nature as human beings and our physical nervous systems and so on. But it doesn't follow from that in any sense, in any way at all, that commits me to materialism in the crude sense of thinking that the only thing that matters in life is the acquisition of material goods. Materialism in that sense, as a value perspective, doesn't follow from materialism in the first sense at all, and it's just a sheer misunderstanding to suppose that it does, but a very common, much too common misunderstanding, I think. So, to as it were, ward off that accusation of materialism in that sense, one might want to talk about the spiritual dimension of human life. I don't know whether to use that phrase or not. I think what I'm most chary of is the term spirituality in the abstract, because I don't think there is such a thing as spirituality in the abstract. There are a whole range of different features of human life which we could collectively refer to as the spiritual aspects of our experience, if you like. But you need to spell them out in detail, not just talk about spirituality in some rather vague and woolly sense. So if we do want to make it more concrete, to spell out what are the things that, if you like, constitute the spiritual dimension of human experience, what are they? They're the things, obviously, that enrich human lives and make human lives worth living. And a lot of what we can say here is pretty obvious, I think. I think the general point is that what makes human life worthwhile and meaningful depends in all sorts of ways on all kinds of relationships to something outside ourselves. The idea that rather than just being turned in on ourselves, a full human life is one which involves various kinds of relatedness. It involves the notion of creativity, for example, the capacity to externalize our own energies, our own vision of the world, put them give them some objective form. And there's a whole range of forms of human creativity, of course, not just artistic creativity, but creativity of all sorts. Our relationships to other human beings are clearly an integral part of what it is that enriches our lives and makes our life worth living. Our relationships of love and friendship, which enrich us in all sorts of ways. And our membership also of a wider human community. And that's important because it gives us some sense of being embedded in something much larger than ourselves in space and time. It's important to us, all of us, I think, to see ourselves as part of an ongoing human community which has a shared past and a shared future. And which gives us a wider perspective in which to understand our lives. Wider still is our relationships to the non-human world, our relationships to other living things, and our sense of being part of a whole network of life, and our relationship to the natural universe as a whole, and the sense of awe and wonder we have our awareness of the beauty and complexity of a universe which, when we take that perspective, can dwarf our merely human concerns and give a proper sense of our place in that vaster universe as human beings, and give us a proper sense of humility and of perspective. These are ways of thinking and attitudes which, again, we can share with religious believers, and it's important to emphasize that religious believers have no monopoly on them, have no monopoly on feelings of awe and wonder when confronted with the beauty of the universe, for example. That brings me back, I think, in conclusion, to the limits of science. Natural science doesn't have much to say about those things, and that's not because there's anything wrong with science and with scientific inquiry, but because those questions about what human life is about, the sense and the meaning of our lives, are not scientific questions. The reason why science can't answer them is not because there's something wrong with science, but because the questions are not scientific questions in the first place. And that's where, in particular, it's important to emphasize the kind of knowledge and the kind of understanding of our own experience that we get from the arts, from all the creative arts, from the visual arts, from music, which gives us a way of articulating and recognizing the great range of human emotions, and the literary arts, and in particular I want to emphasize there the importance of narrative literature and the stories that it gives us, and the ways in which they provide us with patterns and templates for making sense of our own life, and being able to tell a story about our own lives and our own experiences. And it seems to me that in that sort of way, drawing on the resources of the arts, and especially the literary arts, is a deeply important resource for humanists and for any kind of adequate humanism. So I've talked about science, I've talked about consciousness as what's distinctive of what it is to be human. I've talked about morality and the way in which a humanist morality is based on shared human values, which are an integral part of what it is to be human. And I've talked about what you could call, if you like, a humanist spirituality, which recognises the rich and diverse ways in which we can live full human lives. I hope that makes some kind of sense, and I'm very pleased to discuss it and to get your own responses. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Richard. The real tour de force of humanism there. Valuable not only to people who are new to humanism, but also to those that have been around a lot.
So basically, you're too kind.
I'm always accused of being too kind. I never know whether it's a criticism that doesn't bite too hard, but I always am accused of it. Yeah, that's a very good point. Can I take them up? Yeah. Can I start with the last one? It's interesting because I think I agree with that last one. Yeah, and I mean there's what's in part just a pragmatic question about the use of the term. On the one hand, I have some inclination to say, I'm cagey about using the language of spirituality because because that has these religious connotations, and religious believers will then say, oh, so you're religious really then, after all. And the other side of me thinks, but why should I let them appropriate it? And there I agree with you. On the whole, I'm inclined to think we should try to reclaim that word. So I think I agree with you there. What I would also say, this informs my my whole approach. I do. Excuse me. It's not that I think over-kind to religion, but I'm very cautious of overgeneralizing about religion. Now, of course, religion throughout history has, in every society, performed the function of social control. It's also equally important to recognize that, at least in modern societies, religion has also provided a vocabulary for the oppressed and the dispossessed. I don't know whether it has done throughout history, but certainly in modern societies and need to look at the struggle against slavery, the struggle against racism, and so on. So, I mean, that's just one example of the extremely ambiguous nature of religious belief. And in part, it's, just because in most societies until the present day, religious belief systems have typically been the shared framework of understanding, and so far it's quite natural that in any society, both the conservative forces and the critics of the status quo should draw on that same religious framework. Happiness, in the full sense, has to do with living a life that doesn't just feel good, but uses your distinctive human capacities to the full, which is not an easy life necessarily, but one which a life of achievement. It's more than just a life of having good experiences. It's essentially an active life, a life in which you're related to and share your experiences with other human beings. Now, I guess it's dangerous to build too much into the actual word happiness, but nevertheless what we need to reach for is a notion of happiness that goes beyond just immediate psychological states. Now, as to the religious people that I wouldn't know whether their life is one of happiness in a deep sense. It may well be. I don't want to deny that, but it's important for humanists to articulate, what human happiness in a deep sense might be. I think it seems to me there were two aspects to what you just said. I mean, on the one hand, there's the ideology that says human beings are just selfish, so you're a mug if you play any other game. Everybody else is out for what they can get, so you're stupid unless you do the same. That's actually, although there is that attitude, and although one of the ways in which it's sometimes defended is a very crude kind of social Darwinism, it seems to me that that's not the dominant ideology of capitalism. The dominant ideology of capitalism, which is the ideology of market economics, is the idea that private good is public benefit. That if everybody pursues their own good in the market, that's the most efficient way in which the good, the common good, the good of the society as a whole will be advanced. That markets are efficient, and that in the long run everybody will benefit from an efficient market. Now, that's not something that humanism as such, I don't think, has anything to say to. To argue with that, you just have to look at the economics, I think, and you'd have to look at the evidence. I mean, again, I guess, what I would say is that, although that claims to be an empirical claim, actually, again, there's a lot of ideology at work there. I mean, if you look at the way in which markets actually function, human progress over the last couple of 100 years has consisted precisely in particular attempts to tame the market, to control the market, to regulate the market. Now I'm getting into dangerous territory here and getting rapidly out of my depth. But now one of the scary things about the current crisis is that people seem to have forgotten what happened in the 30s and the way in which, by cutting back on public expenditure, you create a deeper recession and so on. But that's not something that there's any humanist line on. So, coming back to where you started, there are issues about human nature, and it's very important for humanists, I think, to combat very crude views about human nature of the kind that do sometimes function as the underlying ideology of capitalism. But there are a lot of other questions to address as well about capitalism and the economic system that aren't of that kind, which aren't ones that humanism as such can address. There was humanists really. Humanism is the attempt to live a good human life without religion, good both in the sense of a fulfilling and deeply satisfying life and a life that's morally good. And in order to do that, we need to draw on the resources of science, of the human capacity for reflective consciousness, on shared human values, and on our capacity to make sense of experience through the creative arts.